In class so far, we have discussed the definition of democracy, the characteristics of democracy, and the theories of democracy. This lecture will address challenges to democracy in the 21st century, and particularly in the United States, even though I think many of these things are challenges that face the established democracies around the world. As Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government that there is, except for all the others. So it is certainly not without its challenges. In the American democracy, one of the biggest challenges is a trend of lower voter turnout or low voter turnout. Democracy is founded upon effective citizen participation, and so citizens have to participate for the democracy to really be a democracy. And so if they don't participate, that is a problem. And as this graph shows, especially since the 1970s, there has been an overall general decline in voter turnout in American politics, and it hasn't been steady, but overall it's been a decline. And this is a big problem. It's driven by many factors. We'll discuss these in general, we'll discuss these particularly in the second unit, and these are factors that are hard to reverse, and despite great efforts that have come in many forms, this has proven to be a trend that has been very difficult or almost impossible to reverse. This graph shows you voter turnout in presidential election years. Without question, these are the elections that have the highest voter turnouts. And you can see that in the mid-2000s is right above 60%. And in 2012 and 2008 and 2016, we were pleased with 60% turnout. And this is not 60% of the population. This is 60% of eligible voters. So I'm sure none of you would ever do badly on a test. But if you ever were to get a 60% on a test, you can be like, Mom, it's more than half. It's good voter turnout. It's not, is it? It's not good voter turnout. And this is what we get in a presidential election year. If we were to look at a graph of midterm elections, which we are in this year in 2018, we are halfway through the presidential term, voter turnout in those elections is typically much lower than in presidential election years. I don't know if that will hold true this year. This year it might be up a little bit. I do believe it will be up significantly in Tennessee. And then what are called off-year elections, elections that take place in between presidential election years and midterm years. Midterm election years tend to have very low turnout. Knox County and Knoxville, for example, has a lot of elections in off years. And turnout typically is very, very low. In the city of Knoxville and in Knox County, local elections generally will draw a turnout of around 10%. This year it's been better. This year I think is the exception and not the rule. But how democratic is it if only 10% of people show up to vote, or if only 8% of people show up to vote, or if only 60% of people show up to vote in a presidential election year? It's a conundrum. In a democracy, you can't force people to vote, but you have to have effective citizen participation. And so voting matters, and who votes, as we will discover in Unit 2, really, really matters. I like this cartoon. I do believe, as I just mentioned, that Tennessee will have higher than average voter turnout this year, given our trifecta of races, especially here in East Tennessee, with a governor race, a senatorial race, and a District 2 seat here in East Tennessee. But generally speaking, Tennessee lags behind the national average even. So we struggle in our state, particularly with low voter turnout. Our second challenge that we are going to look at is what Mr. Edwards calls the rise of experts in government, the increasing reliance upon experts by our representatives who we have elected to represent us and to make laws for us, and an increasing reliance upon experts to actually administer the government and carry out policy, and in certain cases even make policy outside the legislative process. Now, the reason that this has happened kind of slowly but increasingly more and more quickly in the last decade or so is because we increasingly ask our lawmakers to pass laws on numerous complicated areas and to form policy in really, really complicated areas. And I know that sometimes we might like to sit around and call our elected officials stupid, but none of them are. They are all intelligent and highly educated people. But given that, there is still absolutely no way that they could possibly know everything that there is to know about the subject matter of the issues that they're asked to legislate about. And so this is increasingly turned over to experts who write bills, who lobby members of Congress, and who in some cases are actually in charge of entire areas of policy. You might not know this, but there's an entire little subset of people in the executive branch of the American government who have the unofficial title of czar, as in the autocratic absolutist rulers of imperial Russia. And that is not their official title, but that they are unofficially called czar gives you a good indication of the amount of influence and power they have over really small and niche policy areas. And so there is that to it, but still they are the experts, and so they kind of wield this power. And there's no way anyone can know all this stuff. I mean, this is just a small smattering of things we're asking our elected officials to make policy about right now. How to educate students for a 21st century economy. What are the ethics of cloning human tissue, animals, human beings, doing stem cell research? How do you wage a war against a non-state enemy like ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram or other terrorist groups that don't have a state? How do you do this? What is the smart grid? How do you protect it? How do you increase your energy efficiency? We talked about the water infrastructure problem. Like, these are really complicated problems. Bills that legislators deal with, especially in the Congress, number often in the thousands of pages. And so, come on, we've got to be realistic. How are people supposed to deal with this? They rely increasingly on experts. I don't think that this is inherently a bad thing. Not at all. It's good to seek influence and help from people who know what they're talking about. But the reason this is of concern is because nobody elected these people. And so when it comes down to it, they have an awful lot of influence and an increasing amount of influence over policy decisions, but nobody elected them. And so it's not inherently a bad thing, but it is certainly something to think about. In the United States, we privately fund campaigns. That means that candidates for office have to fundraise. They have to get people to give them money. It's not like this in every democracy, but this is a hallmark of the American political system, the American electoral process. Maybe it's the most important facet of it. And our campaigns are increasingly expensive, which means there's pressure on candidates to raise more and more money. Now, people will say, well, money can corrupt, and that is why it is a challenge to democracy. And I think that that is certainly true. I don't know if money corrupts, but it can certainly give the appearance of corrupting. Money in American political campaigns is highly regulated as much as it can be, but increasing amounts of regulation have not slowed down or stopped the flow of money into political campaigns. Now, this is just my opinion, but I think that now we will study campaign finance in great detail, in the coming weeks. I don't think that the money is inherently corruptive. I think there is too much of it, quite frankly, in our electoral system for it to cause corruption. There's simply just too much of it coming from every kind of angle. But there are some really specific problems that it causes. For example, let's come to the senatorial race in Tennessee that's taking place right now. It'll be decided on November 6th. It is widely accepted as fact, and I think this is where the money part is problematic, that candidates for political office in the United States and elected representatives, people even after they are elected, spend most of their time fundraising, not legislating, not meeting with voters, not working with constituents, spend most of their time fundraising. It is the single most important thing that they do. So think about that, okay? It has to be such an incredible priority for them, and I do think that that is problematic. Secondly, this is going to be a big race. I chose this race, y'all, because this is going to be a big race, because in 2018, the majority control of the Senate, which party, the Republicans or the Democrats, control the Senate, is very much going to be at play. It's very closely divided right now, and we have the very unique situation of a popular, moderate former governor who is a Democrat, Phil Bredesen, who you see right here, running against a rather conservative Republican who is currently a member of the House of Representatives. Her name is Marsha Blackburn. She is right here. So here's what's going to happen in this election, guys, and we will watch it closely in this class. Phil Bredesen is going to try to run a campaign on local issues. He is going to try to say to the very red state of Tennessee, hey, you can trust me, you can vote for me. If I go to the Senate, it's not going to be about the Democratic National Committee. It's not going to be about Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and those guys. It's going to be about Tennessee. Marsha Blackburn and Republicans, on the other hand, are very much going to try to make it a national election, and they're going to say you can't elect him. It could tip majority control of the Senate. And here is what is going to happen because of the very consequential nature of this election. Tons and tons of money is going to pour into our fair state. If you don't like political commercials, I suggest that you really stop watching TV for the next several months, because tons of what are called outside groups and outside money are going to pour into this state, and it's going to be all about national control, national issues, which party is going to control the Senate. And so I think this is the other problem with money. I don't think money is inherently corruptive in and of itself, but it can play in a situation like this where you have a statewide election in the state of Tennessee and you have voters in the state of Tennessee. You're going to have all kinds of people and all kinds of groups and all kinds of money from outside the state of Tennessee pouring money into this election to try to affect the outcome. Election security. This isn't in your unit notes if you're looking at those, but I think if you've listened to the news at all lately, you know that this is an issue. So much has been made of the role that a Russian misinformation, disinformation division campaign played in 2016, and their interest in affecting the outcome of the election. Y'all, that's as old as time. That is not a new story. What is a new story is, because of social media and the internet, the wide reach of these particular kinds of campaigns. So just what I say to you is be smart. I hear this news and it really is disheartening to me. I hear on the news like, well, what is Facebook going to do about this? What is Twitter going to do about this? What is Microsoft going to do about this? I think these big tech companies do have a role to play, but we have a role to play too. Be smart, okay? Be smart. You're an intelligent individual. Act accordingly. Okay, we don't need to be babysat all the time, and especially not by Facebook, Microsoft, and Twitter. What about, though, the hacking of electronic voting machines? It could happen. It's kind of a scary prospect. We certainly know that there have been efforts made on the part of bad actors to hack into election voting machines, electoral databases, etc. I think this is a big problem. People need to have confidence in the outcome of elections. And so sometimes, y'all, I think low tech might be better. Can't hack a paper ballot. They're not perfect, but at least you can't hack them from Russia or Iran or Venezuela or somewhere like that. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, the very intense partisan divide in the United States. It is, according to public opinion surveys, more intense than it ever has been in our country, with, perhaps the exception of the 1850s. That's not comforting. I don't think anyone is interested in having a red state, blue area, civil war. But there is no question that increasing partisanship in the country has increasingly led to gridlock in our legislative bodies around the country at the federal level, and most significantly and most noticeably, and also at the state level. These are all things, y'all, that we will discuss in more detail going forward, and these are all significant problems, and they're problems with no easy answers. And so we'll discuss what some of these answers might be in the days and weeks ahead.